Thanksgiving is supposed to be loud in a good way. Clattering dishes, football on in the background, somebody arguing about the best way to make stuffing. Kids running through the house in socked feet, getting yelled at not to slam the screen door. That glow of a house that's too warm from the oven and too full of people who know each other a little too well. But on Thanksgiving night, 2002, the loudest sound in one Indiana farmhouse wasn't the TV or the laughter. It was a 12-year-old kid whispering into a 911 phone line, trying not to cry as he said, "My mom won't wake up. And there's blood. We're going to spend some time at that house tonight." Quick note up front before we start carving this turkey open. This is a fictional case, told in the style of a true story. The people, the town, the investigation, you won't find them in any real court records. But the way things unfold, the way suspicion narrows, the way families fracture, the way one piece of home video changes everything decades later, that part is pulled straight from how real American cases often go. And like a lot of those cases, this one starts at a dinner table where everyone swears they're fine. Our setting is the fictional town of Fox Hollow, Indiana. Population, just under 12,000. It's one of those towns that exists because a highway wanted a place to stop. There's a Walmart, a feed store, a high school that lives and dies on its football team, and on the outskirts, a scattering of old farmhouses surrounded by fields that are nothing but mud and stubble by late November. About 10 minutes outside town, down a county road lined with bare trees and leaning mailboxes, sits the Caldwell place. The Caldwell farmhouse is white, or at least it used to be. The paint is peeling now in long strips that curl like fingernail parings. The porch sags a little in the middle. There's a swing out front that creaks if you breathe on it too hard. Inside, though, it smells like coffee and lemon cleaner and whatever's in the crock pot that day. The Caldwells are not wealthy. They're we can fix that ourselves people. There we keep extra casserole dishes because someone will always need one for a church thing people. And Thanksgiving is their holiday. Every year, without fail, they host. The center of it all is Linda Caldwell. She's 41 in 2002, hair always pulled back in a clip while she's cooking, wearing an apron that says "Kiss the Cook," that her kids gave her as a joke. She loves Thanksgiving with the kind of intensity that makes other people tired. Planned menus, hand-lettered place cards, the good tablecloth iron days ahead. She's the kind of mom who presses containers of leftovers into people's hands as they leave, who always invites the stray co-worker who can't make it home. Her husband is Richard, Rick, to everyone who's ever met him, Officer Caldwell, to a lot of Fox Hollow. He's a sergeant with the local police department, crew cut going gray, back starting to ache from too many years of duty belts and bad mattresses. He's proud, stubborn, and depending on who you ask, either the rock of the family or the reason Linda developed that tight little smile she does when she's trying not to start a fight. They have 3 kids. Derek is the oldest, 22 in 2002. He's the one people lower their voices about. High school football star turned waste of potential. Couple of minor charges on his record, possession, disorderly conduct, one ugly bar fight that got quietly plea bargained down when your dad's a cop and everyone in town has known you since you were in diapers. He's moved back home, just for a while, after washing out of a construction job 2 towns over. Next is Emily, 19, home from her first semester of college. She's the peacekeeper, the one who learned early how to read a room and smooth things over before they exploded. She's also the family documentarian. For her high school graduation, her grandparents bought her a camcorder, a chunky silver thing with a flip-out screen, and tapes that you label with a Sharpie. By 2002, she's filmed just about every birthday, game, and holiday the Caldwells have had. And then there's Josh. 12 years old, all elbows and cowlicks, a little too loud, and then suddenly too quiet. He adores his big brother, even when he's not supposed to. He's old enough to notice tension and young enough not to understand what to do with it, which is how we end up with a kid on the phone to 911 later that night. The morning of Thanksgiving 2002 starts, in the Caldwell house, like a Norman Rockwell painting someone left out in the rain. By 8 a.m., the turkey is already in the oven. The house smells like butter and onions. The Macy's parade is on TV, muted, while Rick flips between that and the Lions game pregame show. Linda moves through the kitchen in a practiced dance, basting brush here, potatoes there, yelling down the hall for someone to get the extra folding chairs out of the garage. Emily pulls into the driveway right around 9, car stuffed with laundry and a bag of textbooks she's not going to touch all weekend. She's got that first semester of college swagger, mixed with homesickness she wouldn't admit to. She walks into the kitchen, drops her bags, and immediately gets handed a peeler. "Hey, Emmy," Linda says, greeting her with a quick one-armed hug and a kiss on the cheek that leaves a flour mark. "You're on potatoes and documenting for posterity." Emily rolls her eyes, but she goes to the drawer where the camcorder lives. She flips the screen open, hits the red button, and starts filming. The tape from that day starts with shaky footage of a turkey in the oven, then whips around to catch her mom laughing, hand to her chest. She pans over the messy kitchen, the stack of grocery store rolls, the Jell-O mold that never sets quite right. She narrates in a faux documentary voice. Subject appears stressed but excited. Subject's husband is useless on couch. Film at 11. If you're watching this later, out of context, it just looks like a kid having fun with a camera. If you're watching it after what happens that night, you realize you're seeing the last normal hours of a family that's about to be torn apart. People start arriving around 10:30. First come Linda's sister, Aunt Donna, with her husband, Uncle Mike, and their 2 boys. There's a flurry of jackets, the crackle of grocery bags with pies and wine bottles in them. Then Grandpa Walt, moving slower than he used to, grumbling about traffic that cannot possibly have existed on a county road, but that's his story and he's sticking to it. Derek is the last of the immediate family to show up. He comes in the back door from the driveway, not the front, smelling faintly like smoke and gasoline. He's wearing a leather jacket over a flannel shirt, jeans with a rip in the knee, boots that leave little crescent moons of mud on the linoleum. His eyes are a little bloodshot. His handshake with Uncle Mike lasts a hair too long, like he's steadying himself. "Look who decided to join us," Rick says from the living room, voice already edged when Derek appears in the doorway. Not yelling. Not yet, but you can feel it from across the room, the tension that rises whenever these two share a space. "Nice to see you too, Dad." Derek shoots back, dropping his keys a little too hard in the bowl by the door. How many Thanksgiving dinners start this way? Old fights reheated like side dishes, layered over the smell of cinnamon and sage. The camcorder catches pieces of this, too. Emily, sitting at the table peeling potatoes, tilts it just enough to catch Derek leaning on the counter, Linda between him and the living room, voice low, trying to head something off before it starts. On the tape, you can't quite hear what they're saying over the TV. You can see Linda touch his arm, though. You can see Derek shrug her hand away. You can see his jaw tightening. By early afternoon, the house is full. There's a card table set up in the living room for the kids. The grown-ups squeeze around the big dining table in the next room. Football is on in the background. Even if nobody's really watching, you can tell what quarter it is by the cheers drifting from the living room. Someone's always in the kitchen, checking on something, refilling something, cursing under their breath when they realize they forgot the cranberry sauce in the fridge. It's loud. It's normal. It's Thanksgiving. Until it isn't. The first crack in the day, the one people will point back to later, happens just after 3. They're eating. Plates piled high. Turkey, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, the works. The conversation is bouncing around. Grandpa Walt complaining about taxes, Aunt Donna telling a story about a co-worker, Josh trying to explain a video game to an audience that does not care. And then Uncle Mike, who has had just enough beer to feel bold, turns to Derek and says, "So, you still at that garage? Or did that not work out either?" The table goes quiet in that awkward, rippling way. Derek's grip tightens on his fork. "I told Mom," he says, voice flat. "They cut hours. It's temporary." Rick snorts. "Temporary since July," he says. "Seems like a long temporary to me." "Rick," Linda says sharply, that warning tone in her voice. "I'm just saying," he continues undeterred. "Man's almost 23. Time to figure it out. The world doesn't owe you anything because you used to throw a football." You can almost feel Derek's ears ringing. He pushes his chair back, the legs scraping on the floor. "Yeah, well, the world doesn't owe you a medal because you write tickets either," he shoots back. "You gonna arrest me for not passing the gravy fast enough, Officer Caldwell?" It escalates quickly from there. They've had this fight before, in different words. Laziness versus bad luck, discipline versus empathy. Only this time there's an audience, and there's beer, and there's something brittle in the air. Linda stands up, hands on the table. "Both of you. Not today. You want to hash this out, pick any of the other 364 days of the year. Not Thanksgiving." Emily reaches for the camcorder, almost out of habit. She clicks it on under the table, the red light blinking as it captures the next 30 seconds in jerky, uneasy footage. Her dad's face flushed, her brother's chair tipping as he stands, her mom between them like a physical barrier. On the tape, you hear Linda say, "Derek, go cool off." You hear him say, "Fine. I'm done," and walk out of frame. You hear the back door open and slam. It could have ended there. It could have been one of those family fights that gets folded into the mythology of Thanksgiving. "Remember the year Derek stormed out?" people would say, laughing later. "And then he came back for pie like nothing happened?" Except this year, things don't fold back into place so neatly. Derek does not come back for pie. Not right away. Hours pass. People recover. The game comes back on. Plates get cleared. Linda starts putting leftovers into containers with that muscle memory of moms everywhere, wrapping aluminum foil over half-carved turkey, scraping mashed potatoes into Tupperware. At some point, around 5, it starts to snow. Just a dusting, flakes swirling past the kitchen window. On the tape, Emily walks outside for a minute, filming the yard. You can hear her boots crunching on the gravel, the wind on the microphone, her laughing softly to herself as she gets too close to the house and films nothing but siding. She pans across the driveway. No Derek's car. Later, he'll say he drove into town to cool off, parked behind the bowling alley, walked around in circles for an hour listening to a burned CD on repeat. That's his story. Back in the house, as evening settles in, things feel almost normal again. There's a board game going at the card table. Someone has made coffee. The pie is out. The older adults are in that lethargic post-meal zone where everyone's full and a little sleepy, but no one wants to admit they're ready to go home yet. Around 7, the lights flicker. Just once. A quick blink. Enough to make everyone look up. "Storm must be hitting the lines," Uncle Mike mutters. Fox Hollow power goes out if someone sneezes too hard. Nobody's panicking yet. At 7:12 p.m., according to the time stamp in the corner of the camcorder footage, Emily is in the living room filming Josh and his cousins arguing over Monopoly rules. The camera catches the cozy lamp light, the reflection of the TV in the window, the corner of the kitchen doorway behind them. Linda passes through the frame, heading toward the kitchen. You can hear her say, "I'm going to put the good china away before somebody breaks something." Rick is in his recliner, half dozing. On the tape, you can see his hand reach for the remote, flipping channels. It's the last clear image of Linda Caldwell alive. What happens next, we only know in pieces. At 7:14, the house goes dark. Not a flicker this time. A full, sudden blackout. Somewhere outside, a transformer gives up for the evening. People shout. Kids yell. Someone swears. A couple of the adults pull out their flip phones to use as flashlights. There's a moment of that weird, giddy laughter that happens when the power goes out and everyone has to decide whether to pretend they're camping. On the camcorder, the footage jumps. The last thing you see before the tape goes mostly black is Josh turning toward the camera, eyes wide. Then just audio, voices overlapping, chairs scraping. You can hear Linda's voice faintly from the direction of the kitchen. "It's okay, hang on, I know where the candles are." You hear a cabinet open. The clatter of dishes. Someone knocking into a chair. Then, just over the noise, another sound. A sharp, heavy thud, like something solid hitting something softer, followed by a smaller, metallic clink. Then nothing. No scream. No crash of shattered plates. Just the ongoing chatter of a house full of people trying to navigate the dark. It takes them a good 30 seconds to realize that the last sound wasn't just someone bumping into the table. "Aunt Linda," someone calls from the dining room. No answer. "Mom." Emily's voice, closer to the camera now, a thread of concern woven through. The beam of a flashlight cuts across the frame as somebody finds their way to the kitchen. There's a pause. A beat. Then a noise that will stay with every person in that house for the rest of their lives. A choked-off gasp, half-sob, half-shout. "She's, oh my God. Rick." The next minute on the tape is chaos. Footsteps pounding. Voices shouting all at once. Someone fumbling with the camcorder, jostling it so the audio warps for a moment. Then a clatter as it's set down on a counter, pointing at nothing but the underside of a cabinet while the world implodes just out of frame. In the official record, there's a small notation. 7:16 p.m., 911 call placed from Caldwell residence. In real time, for 12-year-old Josh, it's just his dad yelling, "Call an ambulance," and his own hands shaking so badly he can barely hit the numbers. The 911 tape starts with breathing. Too loud, too fast. Then a kid's voice. My mom, she fell, she's not, there's blood." The dispatcher, trained for this, walks him through it. Address. What happened? Is she breathing? Are her eyes open? Is there anyone else there who can get on the phone? Put your dad on with me, okay, sweetheart? In the background, you can hear Rick yelling Linda's name, over and over, like if he says it enough times she'll decide to answer. You can hear Aunt Donna crying. You can hear chairs being shoved out of the way. Rick finally takes the phone. "This is Sergeant Caldwell," he says, because even in that moment he is still a cop. Still identifying himself by the badge. "We need an ambulance and a unit out here now. My wife is on the floor. There's a lot of blood. I think she hit her head. The power's out, I can't see." The dispatcher tells him how to do chest compressions, just in case. He tries. He counts out loud. His voice cracks on 7. By the time the paramedics get there, 10 minutes later, Linda is gone. She's lying on the pantry floor, half in, half out of the narrow doorway. There's a dent in the drywall behind her head, a spiderweb pattern of cracks spreading out from one point. A cast iron skillet lies on the floor nearby, one corner smeared with something dark. The good china is stacked neatly on the shelf above her, untouched. There are no signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No muddy footprints that shouldn't be there. Just a house full of family and a woman who was alive 15 minutes ago and now isn't. In a lot of small towns, the line between your home life and law enforcement is thin. In Fox Hollow, it's almost non-existent. The first patrol officer on scene knows Rick personally. They've worked night shifts together. They've complained about paperwork over midnight coffee. He sees his friend kneeling on the pantry floor, hands slick with his wife's blood, face gone a strange, waxy color. And for a moment, he's not looking at a crime scene. He's looking at a buddy having the worst day of his life. That instinct, to see what you expect to see, matters. The official story that starts to form that night is simple. The power went out, Linda went into the pantry to get candles, she slipped in the dark and hit her head. Tragic, but not criminal. The paramedics say they've seen falls like that do a lot of damage. The corner of that cast iron skillet is exactly the wrong shape to meet a skull. They take her body away. The family is told to gather what they need and go stay with relatives in town. The house is technically a scene, but the vibe at first isn't lock it down. It's let's give them some privacy. It's not until the next morning, when the county medical examiner takes a closer look, that anyone says the word homicide. Here's the thing about falls. They tend to leave injuries in certain patterns. Wrists, arms, hips. People throw their hands out to catch themselves, even when they're surprised. They rarely just drop like a puppet with the strings cut. The injuries on Linda are odd. The blow to her head is severe, concentrated in one spot, consistent with a single, focused impact, not a tumbling fall. There are faint bruises on her upper arms, like fingers gripping hard. Nothing dramatic, nothing you'd notice over the chaos at the scene. But when you're looking for them, they're there. Within 24 hours, the Fox Hollow Police Department has a decision to make. Treat this as an accident, sign off, let the family grieve. Or open a homicide investigation into the death of a fellow officer's wife, in his own kitchen, on Thanksgiving, surrounded by half his extended family. They choose the second option. They don't really have a choice. Indiana law doesn't require an autopsy for every death, but when the medical examiner flags something as suspicious, ignoring it can come back to haunt you in court later. They seal the house. This time for real. Evidence tape on the doors. Officers on rotation to keep people out. They photograph the pantry from every possible angle. They bag the skillet. They dust for prints. They also start asking questions. Who was in the kitchen when the lights went out? Who heard that thud? Who found Linda? How long did it take anyone to reach her? The answers are messy. Nobody was paying close attention to the clock. Everyone was disoriented by the darkness. You get 3 different people who swear they were the first into the kitchen. Human memory under stress is not a reliable narrator. One thing becomes clear, though fairly quickly. There is a missing piece. Derek. Multiple people confirm that he wasn't in the house when the power went out. Aunt Donna last remembers seeing him around 4, grabbing a beer from the fridge after round 2 of arguing with his dad about something in the backyard. Emily assumed he'd gone outside to smoke. Grandpa Walt thought he was in the bathroom. By the time paramedics arrive, Derek is still gone. He does not appear in any of the panicked crowd shots on the camcorder tape. His boots aren't in the pile by the back door. His jacket is missing from the hook. He walks back into the story 2 hours later, around 9 p.m., when he pulls into the driveway to find 2 patrol cars and an ambulance, lights still flashing in the cold air. The neighbor across the road watches him get out of his car, sees an officer intercept him before he reaches the porch, sees something in his posture change when he's told. Derek will later say that the night is a blur of images. His dad's face when he sees him, Aunt Donna's wail, the way Josh clings to him like he's drowning and Derek is sure. He remembers trying to go inside and being told the house is a crime scene. He remembers sitting on the hood of his car, hands shaking, watching them wheel out a black bag on a gurney. What he doesn't remember clearly, or what he says he doesn't, are the exact details cops always want. Where he was between 4 and 9 p.m., who can vouch for him, whether anyone saw him in town. That fog, combined with his history, is enough. Derek becomes the first and most obvious suspect. From one angle, the case is almost too neat. You have a troubled adult son with a record and a temper, who has an argument with his father at Thanksgiving dinner, storms out, disappears for several hours, then returns to find his mother dead in a way that doesn't look entirely like an accident. You have a house full of people who are absolutely sure he and his dad were at it again earlier in the day, who've seen him punch drywall when he's mad, who know he and Linda sometimes fought when she tried to get between him and Rick. You have a dead woman with finger-shaped bruises on her arms. You have no unknown fingerprints in the pantry, no signs of a stranger, no evidence of forced entry. In a world where most murders are committed by someone the victim knows, if you're a detective looking at this from behind your desk, your mind lands on the same story everyone else's does. Derek got mad, came back, confronted his mom in the kitchen. Things got physical, she hit her head, and he panicked. You don't have to be a bad cop to see it that way. You just have to be human. Not did you do this, but is it possible you did this and don't remember? Sometimes, when people are really angry, when they're blacked out, like you said, they can do things and their brain kind of protects them from the memory, the detective says. We're not saying you're a monster. We're saying you had a bad moment. Don't you want people to understand that? Don't you want your family to know you're not some cold-blooded killer? It's a tactic. It's used in real rooms like this every day in the U.S. It blurs the line between confession and suggestion. Derek, who has been awake for almost 2 days, who is grieving and guilt-ridden, and has been told since childhood that his anger makes him dangerous, cracks. I don't know, he says, voice shaking. I remember leaving, I remember driving, I remember coming back and seeing the lights. I don't remember, I wouldn't hurt her. I wouldn't. But if you're saying I did, I don't know. On the transcript, that line reads like doubt. In court, later, it will be framed as a kind of admission. Outside that room, you and I might recognize it for what it is. A scared kid internalizing everyone else's worst assumptions about him. A few weeks later, Derek Caldwell is arrested and charged with second-degree murder in the death of his mother. The town splits. There are the people who say, quietly at church or loudly at the bar, well, something like this was bound to happen. The ones who watched him skateboard downtown in high school with a black hoodie and thought, trouble. The ones who heard about the bar fight and filed it away. There are others who can't make the image fit. The little boy who helped his mom carry in groceries. The teenager who threw his arm over her shoulders at his graduation photos. They tell themselves there must be more to it, that the prosecutors wouldn't charge him if they didn't have the goods. Then there's the Caldwell family itself, imploding in slow motion. Rick supports the investigation publicly. He says all the right things about the system working. He says no one is above the law, not even his own son. He nods along when his colleagues talk about getting justice for Linda. Emily sits in the back of the courtroom during the arraignment, hands in her lap, staring at her brother in an orange jumpsuit and shackles. She tries to reconcile the kid she played hide-and-seek with in that very pantry with the description in the charging documents. The defendant, during a heated confrontation, did knowingly cause the death. Josh is 15 by the time the case reaches trial. He stays home on the big days, at his dad's insistence, watching grainy local news coverage of the courthouse instead. The trial itself is a parade of competing narratives. The prosecution presents a simple one. Violent, unstable son with a chip on his shoulder, under the influence of alcohol and possibly drugs, returns to the house after storming out, confronts his mother in the dark kitchen, grabs her, she struggles, he shoves, she falls, hits her head, dies. He either runs, then comes back to discover the scene, or he panics and pretends he was never there. They lean hard on his past. The bar fight, the weed possession, the fact that he's dropped out of multiple jobs. In American courts, prior bad acts are supposed to be limited, but there are always ways to get those narratives in, through state of mind, pattern, context. They play the camcorder audio. They slow it down, loop the thud. They bring in a crime scene reconstructionist who testifies that the angle of the injury is consistent with a forceful push in a narrow space. That phrase, consistent with, is vague enough to cover a lot of sins. They put Rick on the stand. He talks about his son's temper, about holes in walls, about times Linda cried in the bathroom after yet another fight. He does it through tears, which, depending on who you ask, makes him either a brave truth-teller or a man sacrificing his son on the altar of his certainty. The defense tries to poke holes. They bring in their own expert, who says the injury could have been from a fall. They highlight the chaos of the house, the number of people moving through the kitchen, the lack of any physical evidence. No blood on Derek's clothes, no unidentified prints, no eyewitness who saw him in that pantry. They try to suggest, gently, that maybe the cops zeroed in on Derek too fast because it was easier than considering other options. That when a department is investigating one of their own, they'll cling to any suspect who isn't wearing a badge. They point out that nobody ever really examined whether Linda might have grabbed the shelf and pulled something down, that the skillet might have fallen, that if she was reaching for candles and the power cut mid-step, some freak angle could explain the injury. But they're working uphill against a lot of weight. Against community gossip. Against a grieving husband in a uniform. Against a young man who doesn't present the way juries like they're innocent people to look, humble, quiet, put together. At the last minute, facing the possibility of a conviction on a higher charge and 30 years to life, Derek's public defender advises him to take a plea, voluntary manslaughter. 20 years, maybe out in 10 with good behavior. If you roll the dice and lose, you may never see the outside again, the lawyer says. This way, there's an end date. Derek signs. In the official story, that's the end. He goes to prison. The file moves into the closed drawer. Fox Hollow has its explanation. The wild sun snapped. Thanksgiving at the Caldwell house becomes a cautionary tale parents tell their kids when they talk about drugs and anger and squandered opportunity. For everyone else, life moves on. For Emily, life splits into before and after. She finishes college. She moves away for a while to Chicago, then Indianapolis. She gets a job vaguely related to the media degree she picked, editing marketing videos, corporate stuff. She starts to build a life where nobody knows about that pantry or that plea deal. But she never stops carrying a box labeled Caldwell Home Videos from apartment to apartment. It's not a big box, maybe a dozen tapes. Birthdays, Christmases, a couple of random Saturdays, and one tape with Thanks 02 scribbled in her teenage handwriting on the label. For years, she can't bring herself to watch that one. It sits at the bottom of the box, heavy as a brick. Meanwhile, Derek does his time. Prison in real life is less like TV than people think and more like a long, grinding stretch of bad food, boredom, and trying not to get on the wrong person's radar. He gets into a fight once early on. Loses some good time credit. After that, he keeps his head down. Works in the kitchen. Lifts weights. Reads whatever people leave behind in the dayroom. He calls home when he can. Not as much as he should. Sometimes Rick answers, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he talks to Emily. Almost never to Josh. If you asked him, years later, whether he ever believed he might actually have killed his mother, his answer would depend on when you caught him. In the first few years, in the rawness of it, he says, "No, I know I didn't." Over time, though, replaying the interrogation, the way the detective leaned on that whole blacked out with anger theory, the way his own memory has holes, there are nights when he lies on the thin mattress and thinks, what if I did and I just don't remember? That's the part people don't talk about enough. How easy it is to doubt your own mind when everyone around you has decided on a version of you. By 2018, 16 years after Thanksgiving 2002, the world has changed. Camcorders are relics. Everything's on phones now. True crime podcasts are huge. People binge documentaries about wrongful convictions on Netflix and argue about cases in Reddit threads. Forensic science has moved forward, but so has the information fire hose the average person drinks from. Emily is 35, divorced, back in Fox Hollow after a layoff and a breakup that happened too close together. She's working remotely, doing video editing freelance. She's also helping her dad downsize from the farmhouse into a smaller place in town. The house has too many stairs now, too many memories. Rick is older, softer around the edges physically, if not emotionally. He's retired from the force on a modest pension. He walks with a slight limp from an old knee injury. He doesn't talk much about the case or about Derek. When Emily brings up her brother's upcoming parole hearing, he grunts noncommittally. As she boxes up decades of life, Photo albums, knickknacks, the good china that survived that pantry closet. Emily finds the old tapes again. There's a whole market now for digitizing home videos, for putting your childhood on a USB stick before the tape degrades. She decides, half as a professional curiosity and half as a way of procrastinating packing, to set up an old VCR she finds in the basement, connect it to her laptop, and capture the footage herself. Most of it is harmless nostalgia. Baby Josh in a high chair, face smeared with birthday cake. Derek at 16, mock annoyed as she films him trying to fix his car. Linda dancing in the kitchen, wooden spoon as a microphone. And then there's Thanks 02. She stares at the label for a long time before sliding it into the VCR. The tape whirs. The image fuzzes, then resolves. Turkey oven, her mom laughing at the camera. She feels her throat tighten. She sees herself, young, off-screen voice making sarcastic commentary. She sees her grandparents, her aunt, the Monopoly game. She knows what's coming. She knows roughly when it happens. She sets up the capture anyway, fingers hovering over the space bar ready to pause if she needs to. She watches the argument at the table, now with adult eyes. The way her dad's jaw clenches. The way her mom's hand shakes slightly as she reaches for her water glass. The way Derek looks like he wants to leave his own skin. She watches herself pan away. She hears that familiar thud when the lights go out. She feels her heart rate spike, even though intellectually she knows what's next. And then, because this is 2018 and she's a video editor now, with access to tools she didn't have as a teenager, she doesn't just turn the tape off and put it back in a box. She imports the file into her editing software. She scrubs back and forth. She zooms. She adjusts the levels. She applies some of the audio filters she's used 100 times on corporate videos to make whispered boardroom chatter more legible. Little details start to emerge that she'd never noticed in the chaos. A reflection in the glass of the china cabinet as her mom walks toward the kitchen. A shadow moving in the background of a shot she'd always thought was empty. A sliver of the hallway leading to the pantry, visible in the corner of the frame as the camera sits on the counter after being set down. At 7 hours 12 minutes and 3 seconds, in that corner of the frame, you can see Rick stand up from his recliner. That's not new. She always knew he got up when the lights went out. What she never processed is the timing. He's on his feet almost before the house is fully dark. His silhouette moves toward the kitchen, not stumbling or groping like the others, but with a weird certainty, as if he knew exactly where he was going. At 7 hours 12 minutes and 9 seconds, in the reflection of the glass front of the cabinet, you can see two blurred shapes in the pantry doorway. One taller, one shorter. Arms moving. A hand raised. At 7 hours 12 minutes and 11 seconds, the tape shakes as someone bumps the counter, and the reflections disappear. At 7 hours 12 minutes and 13 seconds, the thud. It's nothing you could take into a courtroom as definitive proof. The resolution is too low. Faces are indistinguishable. But once you see that shadow in that reflection, that movement, you can't unsee it. Emily sits there in the half-packed Caldwell kitchen, rewinding those seconds over and over. The hair stands up on the back of her neck. For the first time, a thought that's been faint and flickering for years solidifies into something she can't ignore. What if they got it wrong? What if Derek didn't come back into the house at all? What if the only person with Linda in that pantry, when she died, was the man the whole investigation took at face value as a grieving husband and credible cop? It's a terrifying thought, not just because of what it implies about her father, but because of what it implies about the system that put her brother behind bars. A lot of people might close the laptop and shove the tape back into the box. Call it old ghosts. Tell themselves they're overthinking. Emily doesn't. Instead, she does something very 2018. She emails a podcast. There's a show she listens to religiously, one of those narrative true crime podcasts where the host spends a whole season on a single case. They did an episode a couple years back about an Indiana man whose conviction was overturned when new forensic evidence came to light, and Emily remembers how, in the bonus episode, the host mentioned wanting to hear from listeners with stories of small-town cases that never sat right. She writes, then rewrites an email, leaves it in her drafts overnight, sends it the next morning, figuring nothing will come of it. To her surprise, the host writes back within days. The host's name is Mara. She's in her early 40s, based out of Chicago, and she has that mix of reporters' skepticism and advocates' passion that makes her both compelling and, frankly, a little dangerous to the status quo of a town like Fox Hollow. Mara asks for more details. Police reports, court documents, The tape. Emily hesitates. This is her family's worst day, turned into content. But it's also, maybe, the only way to get eyes on something the local system has already decided is settled. She uploads the digitized video to a secure drive and sends Mara a link. A few weeks later, Mara emails back, "Can I come to Fox Hollow?" By the time Mara and her small production team roll into town with their microphones and their rental car, Emily has given in and met with one other person, a lawyer. In American post-conviction law, getting a case reopened is hard. There's a doctrine called finality that courts lean on heavily. Once a conviction is in place and appeals are exhausted, you can't just keep relitigating because you changed your mind or found a new angle. You need something materially new, evidence that couldn't have been discovered before with reasonable effort. A grainy reflection on an old tape doesn't sound like much. But framing the original conviction in light of that tape, and the way the investigation leaned on Derek's prior record and Rick's credibility, that's something a good lawyer can work with. The attorney Emily talks to is part of an innocence project at a state university, a clinic where law students, supervised by experienced lawyers, take on possible wrongful convictions. They've seen a lot: bad eyewitness IDs, junk science, coerced confessions. When Emily shows them the video, the lead attorney, a woman named Carla, doesn't gasp or proclaim a smoking gun. She just leans forward, watches it 3 times, and says, "The question isn't just what's on this tape. It's why nobody ever seriously looked at this angle before." They request the entire case file. Reports, photos, autopsy, interrogation videos. They file a petition with the court to get copies of the original camcorder tape admitted as newly discovered evidence. They start the slow bureaucratic process that, if successful, could earn Derek an evidentiary hearing, a chance to present the new information in front of a judge. Meanwhile, Mara starts recording. Her podcast season, Fictional, but built like many real ones, is structured in episodes. One on the Thanksgiving itself, one on the investigation, one on the trial, one on the new evidence. She interviews Emily, voice shaking on tape. She talks to neighbors. She tries to talk to Rick. He gives her a terse no comment and closes the door. She tracks down the original lead detective, retired now, who insists they got it right. "Kid had trouble written all over him," he says into her mic. "We didn't railroad anyone. We followed the evidence." When she asks him if anyone ever considered Rick as a suspect, his face hardens. "Absolutely not," he says. "Rick loved that woman. He was a good cop." Those things aren't mutually exclusive, Mara points out later in her narration. Good people do terrible things in bad moments all the time, and systems built on trust can mistake loyalty for truth. She also talks to Josh, now in his 20s, who has spent most of his life trying not to pick sides between his father and his brother. He tells her about that night as he remembers it: the smell of candles and turkey, the sound of the thud, the weight of the phone in his hand. "I always just went along with what they said," he admits. "That Derek must have come back when no one saw and done it. But I never actually saw him that night. I never heard his voice in the dark. I believed what the grown-ups told me." The podcast, when it starts releasing episodes, changes the tone of the conversation in Fox Hollow. Suddenly, this isn't just a 30-second segment on local news once a decade when they do Where Are They Now on old cases. It's a deep dive that thousands of people across the country are listening to on their commutes, forming opinions, tweeting about. Some locals resent it. "We don't need outsiders stirring up old wounds," they say on Facebook. Others, especially younger folks who grew up on true crime content, devour it. They start threads, pointing out inconsistencies. Someone notices that in the crime scene photos, the pantry shelf is fully intact, even though if Linda had grabbed it and brought down the skillet, you'd expect more disarray. Someone else notes that the bruises on her arms are in a pattern more consistent with someone facing her, not someone shoving from behind. It's not official evidence, but it builds pressure. Under that pressure, the county prosecutor, who was a junior ADA back in 2002 and signed some of the original filings, has to respond. She can either double down, saying, "We stand by our conviction," or acknowledge the possibility of error. The legal motion filed by Carla and the Innocence Clinic gives her a third option: agree to an evidentiary hearing. Let a judge look at the new material. If the judge finds that a reasonable jury, hearing all the evidence, might have reached a different verdict, he can vacate the conviction and order a new trial. In a small courtroom, under fluorescent lights and the gaze of a few reporters and a lot of townspeople, that hearing takes place. Derek, older now, a little heavier, hair cropped short by prison barbers, sits at the defense table in a suit that doesn't fit quite right. He's already out on parole by then. He got out after serving about 14 years, but the conviction still hangs over everything. Where he can live, what jobs he can get, the way people look at him in the grocery store. Emily sits behind him. Rick, after much debate, shows up and sits on the opposite side of the aisle. Carla plays the enhanced tape. She slows it down, describes the reflections. She brings in an audio expert who testifies that the thud on the tape is equally consistent with an object being swung into a fixed surface as with a body falling. Which again is scientist speak for, you can read this either way, but it's not a slam dunk for the prosecution's original story. She calls the medical examiner, now semi-retired, who admits under oath that, had she known then what she knows now about certain injury patterns, she might have written her report differently. The prosecutor pushes back, arguing that this is all speculation layered onto old, degraded footage, that the original plea was knowing and voluntary, that Derek himself acknowledged the possibility that he had hurt his mother in a blackout rage. Carla counters by calling a psychologist to explain how suggestible memory can be under interrogation, especially when someone is being told over and over that they're capable of something monstrous. She plays parts of the interrogation where the detective uses phrases like, "We know you did this," and "good sons take responsibility," illustrating how those words can funnel someone toward an, "I don't know, maybe I did," even when they didn't. And then, in a move that surprises everyone, including the prosecutor, she calls Rick to the stand. He doesn't have to testify. He could invoke his Fifth Amendment, right, if he thought he might incriminate himself. But he's proud, and he's angry, and he thinks he can stare down this challenge like he's stared down suspects in a squad room. On the stand, he looks smaller than he does in Emily's memories. He talks about that night again, how he got up when the lights went out, how he went toward the kitchen, heard the noise, found Linda on the floor. His story hasn't changed in 16 years. Carla questions him gently at first, then more pointedly. "You testified in the original proceedings that you did not enter the pantry until after the others had arrived. Is that right?" "Yes." "You're aware that the newly analyzed video appears to show you moving toward the pantry within seconds of the blackout." "I want to get my flashlight," he says. "I know where it is." Muscle memory. "You're also aware that the bruises on your wife's arms were in the shape and position of hands gripping from the front." He swallows. "I never grabbed her." "Sergeant Caldwell, did you ever, in the course of your marriage, grab your wife by the arms during an argument?" The prosecutor objects. Relevance. The judge allows a limited line of questioning. Rick hesitates. "Maybe once or twice," he says finally. "We had arguments. That doesn't make me a killer." The air in the room thickens. Carla lets the silence sit for a beat. Then she says quietly, "Did it ever occur to you that, in a moment of anger, you might have done something and not wanted to remember?" It's a deliberate echo of the language the detective used on Derek years ago. Rick flares. "No," he says. "I know what I did. I know I didn't hurt her." "Do you know," Carla asks, "or do you believe? Because for 16 years, your son has lived under a conviction based more on what people believed about him than on what anyone knows for sure." In the end, the judge doesn't declare Rick guilty of anything. That's not his role. He doesn't even have to formally rule on whether someone else did it. He just has to answer one question. If a jury back then had seen this tape up close, had heard from these experts, had been made fully aware of how heavily the case leaned on Derek's past and on assumptions about who must have done this, is there a reasonable likelihood they could have reached a different verdict? After a long pause, he says yes. He vacates Derek's conviction. The courtroom doesn't erupt. This isn't a Hollywood movie. There are a few gasps. Someone sobs quietly. Derek just sits there, staring straight ahead, because what do you do with that kind of news when you've already served most of the time? The prosecutor has the option to retry the case. On paper, the charge is still there. They could take it to a new jury with the same physical evidence and hope for a different outcome. In practice, she knows that will look like persecution, not prosecution. She also knows that, with the tape now public and the narrative shifted, a defense attorney would have a field day with alternative suspects, including a former cop who, even if he never laid a hand on his wife that night, now looks a lot less untouchable. So quietly a few months later, the state files a notice of dismissal. The charge is dropped in the interests of justice. There is no new arrest. There is no press conference naming a new official suspect. The case of the Caldwell Thanksgiving death is reclassified from closed to unsolved. A square of pixels in a database changes color. That's it. Out in Fox Hollow, though, everything feels different. For some, the new story is almost too much. It's one thing to believe the bad son did a bad thing. It's another to accept that maybe the cop you waved at in the grocery store, the man who carried Linda's casket, might have been the last person to see her alive in that pantry, and might not have told the full truth about what happened there. People cope in different ways. Some cling to the original version. They just let him off on a technicality. They mutter about Derek. Podcasts and fancy lawyers. They point to the plea, to the statement in the interrogation, as if words said in a tiny room can't be shaped by pressure. Others swing too hard the other way, turning Rick into a cartoon villain in their minds. They forget that, even if he did do something terrible in a flash of anger, that moment was likely wrapped up in years of stress, resentment, unaddressed problems, all the messy things that can make family life explode. Emily and Josh are stuck between those extremes. After the hearing, after the dismissal, after the microphones are put away and the podcast episodes are all out and consumed, they have to figure out how to do Thanksgiving again. They try 1 year to do it without their dad. Just the two of them, a small turkey takeout sides. It feels wrong. The silence at the table is too loud. They try the next year to invite him and not talk about it. That feels worse. Fox Hollow, being what it is, has its own way of handling awkward truths. People talk around them. They euphemize. Things were hard in that family, they'll say. That whole situation was sad. Nobody sits down at the diner and says, "We let our fear of the black sheep blind us. We trusted the uniform more than the messy kid. We made a narrative out of Thanksgiving that we never questioned until a camera and a podcast forced us to." In the end, what we're left with in this fictional case is not a neat resolution, but something murkier. Legally, Derek is no longer a convicted killer. Socially, the stain doesn't wash off that easily. Some people will always cross the street when they see him. Others will buy him a beer and say, "I always knew," even if they never once lifted a finger to help before. Legally, Rick is an old man with no charges against him. Morally, well, that depends on what you think when you imagine that pantry. Maybe you picture a man who grabbed his wife's arms one time too many, who shoved too hard, whose grief afterward was twisted around guilt so tight he couldn't tell which was which. Maybe you picture an accident that got swallowed up by a justice system that needed a villain and found an easy one. There's another layer to this, though, that doesn't get written down in reports but shows up in how people talk in the break room. Rick is one of their own. Nobody says it outright, but it's there. The idea that he's the victim here, too. That his screw-up kid brought this grief into his house. That this wouldn't have happened if Derek had just turned out better. Within days, Derek is invited down to the station to clear some things up. He goes. He doesn't ask for a lawyer. Not really because he's innocent and thinks that means he doesn't need one, although that's part of it. Mostly because he spent his whole life being told, explicitly and implicitly, that cops are authority. That you cooperate. That it'll go worse for you if you don't. It's the classic interrogation room setup. Small table, 2 chairs, bland walls. A camera in the corner, recording. A folder in front of the detective, thicker than it needs to be, just to make it look like they already know everything. The lead detective is technically from the county sheriff's office, brought in to avoid the appearance of conflict of interest. But he's worked with Rick for years. They're not strangers. He starts soft. Condolences. Offering water. Asking Derek to tell him about his mom, his family, Thanksgiving that day. Derek talks. For hours. The tape is almost painful to listen to. He keeps saying, "I didn't do anything," but he also admits to 1,000 little things that don't help him. That he slammed doors, that he called his dad a bastard at the table, that he punched his steering wheel out in the driveway before he left, that he parked by the bowling alley and just drove around for a while because he was too keyed up to go anywhere specific. He can't produce a receipt. He doesn't have a friend who can say, "Yeah, he was with me." Cell phone records are no help. This is 2002. He has a pay-as-you-go brick in the glove compartment that he only turns on if he has to. The detective plays him the audio from the camcorder, just the parts where you can hear that thud, and the chaos afterward. "You sure you weren't there, Derek?" He says no, over and over. "Because it kind of sounds like you." The detective says at one point, even though the audio is so messy you can't identify anyone's voice with forensic certainty. But this isn't about certainty, it's about pressure. Eventually, after hours of talking in circles, the questions shift. Maybe you picture something in between, where nobody is entirely innocent and nobody is the monster the headlines would make them. The one person we don't get to ask is Linda. Her voice lives only in those tapes now, laughing at spilled flour, scolding someone for sneaking a piece of turkey early, saying, "Not at Thanksgiving," as if that magical phrase could hold the family together. Once a year, around late November, people who listen to Mara's podcast still post about this case. They tag photos of their own messy tables, their own loud families, with the episode number. They say it made them rethink how sure they are about the stories their families tell, about who's good, who's trouble, who gets blamed when things go wrong. And that's one of the strange side effects of true crime in the age of social media. A private family tragedy can become a kind of cultural ghost story. So as you sit with this one, let me hand the carving knife over to you for a second. If you were seated on that first jury, with the original evidence, would you have voted to convict Derek? If you were seated on a new one, with the tape under a magnifying glass, the interrogation tactics laid bare, the reflection of a shadow in a glass cabinet, and a cop husband whose story suddenly looks less solid, would you have enough doubt to say not guilty? And, maybe more importantly, when you look around your own Thanksgiving table, at the black sheep, the peacekeeper, the authority figure in the room, do you ever think about how quickly your mind assigns roles? How fast you'd decide, if something went wrong, whose fault it must be? Drop your theory in the comments. Who do you think was really in that pantry when the lights went out? And what do you think actually happened in the seconds between Linda reaching for the candles and Josh dialing 911? Because in this Thanksgiving story, the turkey got eaten, the pies got sliced, the football game played. But the real leftovers were the stories everybody told themselves afterward. And those are the hardest to scrape off the plate.